Welcome to Work is Weird Now. Today we've got our solo episode, just me and Dan. So
just us.
Yes, which is always nice. It's kind of like a refresher on what we've been doing and what we're going to do next. We've just finished up our Now What or What Now series. I think we've interchanged them throughout the series, but they kind of mean the same thing, which is essentially when something happens to you in your career and you need to reconsider your next move or figure out what you want to do next. It is that kind of feeling of what now? What do I do now? And through that lens, we spoke to first Chloe Alana Williams, who spoke to us about what happens when the family that you'd planned doesn't necessarily work out the way that you wanted to. And we see that happening more and more for various reasons in society at the moment. People are having fewer children or having them later. And so that is becoming, or not at all. And that is becoming a reality for more and more people. And so if family is not the plan, then what is work for? What are you working for? Which is maybe a bit controversial, but that's what we like to do here at Work is Weird Now. Second, we had
Berggren. Yeah. And he is a true digital nomad, right? And that's a topic that you especially wanted to cover for some time. So when we discovered his world and the whole, and he's away from the traditional workplace that we experience, he's very much in live music and events, but there is this entire community built around being a digital nomad. And I think what I really enjoyed about what he talked about was that there's almost this perception and glamour of being a digital nomad, but there's hard truths and hard realities around it. But if you get the sweet spot and truly understand what it means and you're in the right community and you set it all up in the right way, it can actually really work. And he's the happiest he's ever been in his entire life, right? And I felt quite almost a little bit seen, because I remember when I told people I was going to start consulting or working for myself, that the amount of people that said to me, you can just go to like a Pilates class whenever you want, or you can just go and work at a coffee shop. And I'm like, oh, this is the Instagram versus reality thing, right? Of what this type of career looks like. It seems to be all hearts and roses and glamour. And I imagine it's the same for digital nomads, but there's grit in there, but actually the freedom and the possibility that it can bring is huge, right? And that's why he does it. That's why other people do it.
Yeah, and his Now What is really for anybody who thinks they want to go and live somewhere else. Or has to go and move somewhere else. I mean, I moved overseas. I guess I didn't have to, but I made that decision. And my question was, what happens now to my career? And so that's the question that we were exploring with him. And we asked him questions like, do you think it has impacted the trajectory of your career? Has it made you think differently about what you wanted to do for a living? Has it made you think differently about work? And that surfaced some interesting insights.
And happiness, I think that's one thing he really brought true, is about being happy and contentment. It did make me think, Alice, of one of the first times we met, I think maybe, or when you and I had a DMC about your career. And I remember you saying that you were thinking about your values and your purpose. And I think you'd said something along the lines of you wanted to be able to work from just with, be able to take your laptop and work.
Geographic indendence. That
geographic
was
independence.
My aim.
Anywhere. And that was your aim at one point. I don't know if that is still the aim, but it would have been 10 years ago when we first met, when you'd said that. And that stuck with me of, you have to choose a certain path. Some in-house roles will create that for you, right? But actually working for yourself and having have a portfolio career can really give that level of, geographical independence.
I mean, it's funny because that's something I wanted from very early in my career. I remember stating that to my now husband when we first started dating. That was really his goal was financial independence, probably actually quite much more useful. Mine was geographic independence. But I actually achieved that quite quickly because I started consulting. And so I could work more or less from anywhere that I wanted to. I think what's happened since then is that I've learned the benefits of community, and actually being grounded in a place to some extent is really useful, and being able to balance that need for community and and put community in the right places in your career so that you are drawing on insights. But not just that, but actually the place itself is quite inspiring. I mean, I think, we've talked about before, every time we go into town and we sort of walk through Shoreditch, you kind of get this energy from the street, and it is inspiring. And so I think there is an element of figuring out how you balance your desire for place, your desire for community, and your desire for freedom all together so that you can gain all the benefits of all of those things. So yeah, that was a really interesting discussion.
And I feel that at the moment. So I've sort of been working from home. So I'm coming up to 2 years now. Brackets, that's bonkers. Probably did another episode on that. One of the clients I'm working with, their web agency was like, "Oh, Dan, if you're ever in town and you need a place to work, come and work with us." And it was almost just come and work with us. It was like so community, and I was so drawn to it. And then the past couple of weeks, I've been hot desking back at a company based down here in Brighton. I've really loved, it's just being around people, and I've felt like productivity. Have you got a coffee delivery?
Smoothie delivery.
Hi.
You're on an episode. Goodbye.
Oh, really?
No, leave him in. Let him in. I wonder what you think, Alex. Oh,
We're shutting the door literally in his face.
I can have my mouse. I can have my dongle.
Okay, he's actually officially debuting on this episode.
Could you wish him happy birthday from me, please?
Oh, happy birthday. It's not till the end of August, but he's making a year-long celebration of it.
Please, so. Yeah, so I've been going in there the past few weeks, and it's really, and I'm a big believer in being able to work anywhere, right? Choosing where to work for the type of work that you need to do. But when I haven't been in the office for like a couple of weeks or a couple of months, I felt like a different level of energy of just being around those people. And I think linking it back to Krista, they create this annual festival. It's like this 10-day event, a festival where there's different, there's talks, there's workshops, there's all these different things. And I just think if you are truly living this digital nomadic life, that would be such a big centerpiece of your year and your world, and the connections that you make. Like, this is what goes into building this type of career, right?
And also he talks about the difference between working in Sweden and working in Bulgaria. And regardless of what that means for the industry and the profession you work in, those two places have very different energies, especially if you're a creative, which he is. And so he's really inspired by the hustle and bustle and the imperfection, which creates some level of desirable friction for him in Bulgaria. Whereas in Sweden, he sees everything as sort of perfect and organized, which isn't necessarily the right place for what he does. And I think there's something we probably don't think enough about is that what does the place infuse into the way that we approach work?
Oh, massively so. And I'm really starting to see that. I think you can become a bit stale. And I think this almost, we're hopefully moving away from being chained to an office. You can see the office design now in itself. They're around 50-60% desks, fixed desks, right? They have touchdown spaces, they have breakout spaces, I've just interviewed somebody for a case study that's got a collab. So there is a lab, but then there's all of these different areas for the scientists to go write up, read different pieces of research, share, like there's loads of glass partitions. And it was so fascinating because we need different work settings, be it in one place or be it like, I know sometimes being here at my home desk, actually, if I went to a coffee shop, the irony, and just went there for 2 hours, and the hustle and the bustle actually can make me really focus on some stuff. That being said, if I needed to write something, being in the quiet of the home, is actually much more useful to me. And I just think that we work is weird now, right? Like we've got to
we just underestimate that relationship that we have with the place. So yeah. So then we spoke to Emy, who we talked to about redundancy, which is maybe the more traditional view of now what, right? Because many people have been in that situation where they've had to leave their job or been forced to leave their job for whatever reason and have stood there and thought, okay, now what am I supposed to do with myself? And Emy talked about momentum and the importance of momentum and how you can sort of harness that in the early days post-redundancy. But I think for her, it was really about what does she do to then pivot into something different that's really her passion. It just so happens that her passion is helping other people pivot post-redundancy or to look at careers in a different way now that all these changes are happening to the way in which we procure work and the types of job we have and the tenure of those jobs and, whether they're part-time and so on. And I think she's looking specifically at early careers people, but also mid-careers and anybody who might find themselves in a situation where they need to be able to step back and assess what they really want to do and get to that conclusion quite quickly in a way that translates to ongoing work.
Yeah, and I find it so inspirational that, I look at Holly Hobbs, look at Emy, there are people who just have this totally different outlook on work and they see endless possibility. Like if something doesn't exist, they create it, right? I didn't have that mindset growing up. I don't know if it is like a mindset the way people have built. Like I just find it so unbelievably inspirational. I just want to call out as well, like you mentioned about her momentum after redundancy. She really calls out having stillness first. I just think that stillness to just absorb and think and take a minute and not have to react. And she did say, look, I was in a fortunate position that I didn't need to scramble to find a job straight away, but took a moment of stillness to actually think and go, what do I really want to do now? Is this a moment that's held the mirror up to say, you weren't really happy in your current career path? This is, an opportunity to pivot, So there was a lot of really great lessons there that I thought from Emy in that sense. And if anyone is listening to this, she's looking for careers coaches to be a part of RE and that whole career cohort. So I think I'm going to sign up to do that. We'll tag everything in that episode when it does go live. It will have gone live.
And I think that point too that you've made there around that stillness and that kind of early reflection goes back to another topic that we have been exploring this week, partly because Mark Haywood, who's a former guest on the pod, he came on and did an episode on a sort of similar theme actually about what do you do before you quit your job? What should you have in mind? And he put a post on LinkedIn and very kindly tagged us talking about how he, as a part of his birthday celebrations, is going to give the gift of himself of dividing his identity into two parts. So he is both a screenwriter and a person who works in a very corporate job as a kind of risk advisor. And to date, he'd been wearing one lanyard, as he puts it, or the other, and had to sort of face whoever he was facing. He was being that identity in that moment. And what his gift to himself on his birthday was to embrace both aspects. And I think that actually goes back to that idea of reflecting after you lose your job, or reflecting at any moment where you find yourself asking, now what? Which is actually thinking about what is that thread that continues across your entire career that really is the thing that you keep returning to. And I think this right here gets at the nub of this idea that I've been circling since we started doing this podcast, which is, we know that work is changing. We know that the nature of work is changing. What does that mean for us and our identity and our feeling around certainty? And I'll talk more about that in a minute, because I think that was another theme that emerged from these 3 episodes. But how do we actually shift from thinking of ourselves as professionals towards being obsessionals, right? So how do we figure out what that obsession is that sits at the heart of what we do, the thing that we keep returning to over and over again? And I think post-redundancy is a really good opportunity to do that. And actually what Emy is proposing through her platform is going to help people to do that. So I think this is a really good question for anybody who's facing a shift or the need to pivot in their careers, is what is that thing that you always return back to? For me, and this is going to sound weird, but I've decided it's about coherence. So from the time I was a journalist to working on brand strategies to, advising companies around, so creating coherence through their own strategies and messaging and culture and that sort of thing, and not speeding up to the detriment of coherence. And then this podcast, right? How do we create a kind of coherent picture, take all these various threads and form them into one thing? For me, that is the thing that I always go back to, is I'm constantly trying to provide coherence in all these different formats, and having that realization that this is me as an obsessional versus a professional, which would be something like I'm a brand strat, has actually allowed me to embrace all these different identities and these different things that I do in a much more coherent way. So yeah, that was a real insight for me across the last few weeks.
A light bulb moment. And it's funny you say that. I think I'm about to start that journey because I've been asked for my CV and
retro.
Right. So I was like, oh, what? And it's hilarious. And I don't think I'd have even had this reaction to it, because of the conversations we've had on this podcast, Claudia Cardinale, etc. If I wanted a job now, I wouldn't write a CV. I'd just go straight to LinkedIn. Like, these quotes from this podcast stick out in my mind. And I've got a few things that just happened over the past few weeks that I'm like, oh my God, that's been a moment from the pod. But I need to write a CV. I haven't done it for 2 years since started own business, pod, whatever. And it is making me think, like, how do I, and it can be so static and stale. And I'm like, it's about positioning like the best version of yourself. I'm like, no, what is it I think potentially for the first time in my career, that I'm really thinking hard about what I want this to say and show about what I've done, but what I want to do. And what I'm doing in between to get me to the place that I want to be as well, So it's maybe we'll reflect back on it on the next one. Maybe there'll be an episode on where do you even start with your CV in this weird world of work at the moment. But that's like and I think you've nailed your purpose, I suppose, and an identity around that. And I think that's a bit to figure out. But what do you do when you need to write a CV now, right? Where do you even start? So I think that was an interesting one.
I mean, there's definitely a need to reinvent the CV in some form, right? It's almost like it needs to be a 3D model with your obsession that sits at the heart, and you can sort of access it from different sides. This idea that it's linear and sits on a piece of paper, it just doesn't work anymore.
It doesn't work. Yeah, I totally agree. As well as Mark's put out that amazing newsletter. Chloe's got a really great newsletter as well, where she reflects on the podcast. And I've also, over the past few weeks, just met up with some old teammates from over the past 10 years, like teammates. And it really made me reflect on one of Simon's episodes from like season 3, I think, about work being therapy and friendships and relationships. And I don't know, I am this summer reflecting almost just on some of those older episodes that we've got, but how relevant they still feel. And just how, work is not work and life is not life. The two blend and we leak as humans. And I think it's just been a really interesting couple of weeks for me personally. I've loved meeting up with people who I've hired or have been peer level with, and then watching them where they're at in their careers, and their take on work at the moment has been so interesting, because we're also friends completely separate to it. And I
actually
love that.
That really speaks to the thing that we concluded at the end of Chloe's episode too, because we did ask the question, if family is no longer a guarantee, what are we working for? And where we got to at the end was actually that it's maybe not about family, but it is about people, right? It's about community. It's about creating the spaces where you can come together with other humans and form connections. And I think that was quite an interesting insight to come out of that episode, and really speaks to the experience that you've had this week. I think the other thing just a final point that emerged from all 3 episodes was what Chloe calls certainty maxing, right? So we have this desire as human beings for certainty, right? It's really difficult to do anything unless you've got some level of certainty in your life around where your money's going to come from, what you're going to be doing, and so on. And, to some extent, I'd say we're probably stuck on certainty. And in fact, Krister makes this really lovely point in his episode around certainty actually comes from inside. That's where you find certainty. You can't look to the world or to a job or to a role or to a place or, even to a family to provide certainty. Actually, you need to find that inner certainty that allows you to move through the world with some level of confidence, right? So that's one thing. But I think one of the things that Chloe talked about was this notion of the world, the job market, needing to respond in some way to provide certainty in a context where it's almost impossible to do so, right? So businesses are moving so much. We all feel it right now. We all feel, I mean, I know you and I certainly do. We feel that, we get a proposal in, or we get a request for a proposal from a business. We put it together. We work with them to bring it in line with what they want. And then they go quiet on us. And they ghost us forever. And I think the reason for that ghosting, if I'm being generous, is not just a lack of decorum, but it is actually probably the fact that everything is moving so quickly for businesses that they're incapable of actually making those decisions because they just need to respond to what's happening on the ground. And I think what that means for employees, the typical notion of certainty is being eroded all the time, right? So the idea that you have a job and you could stay in it, or that you get a contract and it's going to stick, is becoming less and less of a thing. But all that said, we know statistically that innovation only happens when people feel some level of certainty, right? So you have to provide it to them in some way. And I think with Chloe, we explored some ideas around how employers can start to offer that, whether that's through multi-year contracts or something like that, which, is similar to what you'd see in certain countries. Like I know Japan's looked at this kind of model, and in certain industries, like kind of tenured professors in academia, things like that. So there's certainly things that employers can do. There's certainly things that we as individuals can do, as Krister said, around trying to find certainty that means something to us. And then there's also a way that we can tackle it from Emy's point of view, which is to actually plan our careers in a way that provides us, as we always talk about, portfolio careers, that provides us with some level of redundancy, being able to spread the risk across different roles and that kind of thing. So there's a number of different ways that we can harness certainty as individuals, as organizations, and so on, that don't rely on our conventional notions of what that means. So if we circle all the way back to the now what question, well, maybe we shouldn't be asking that question at all, because by the time we reach those cliff edges, we should have some certainty already built into our lives that allows us to not have those cliff edge moments.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the sands are just shifting so quickly across the board. And I was reading something yesterday where it was saying something along the lines of 75% of employees that were surveyed were planning on not moving in the next 12 to 24 months. And I think that is a sign or a signal of one thing. And you say, craving that certainty and not putting things at risk. That being said, everybody that you speak to at the moment is that the world of work is weird right now.
Mm-hmm.
In every shape or form.
So
every
true.
shape or form.
In other news, we've submitted our trademark for Work is Weird Now. So
we have
hopefully we will have that soon. And then we're the only people who can say that ever again.
Yeah, right. And then we were also booking in some new interviews, some of which I'm very, very excited about. One with a particular guest who was the first person to have the job title of personal brand manager on LinkedIn. Not even in the UK, on LinkedIn, which is just insane. So that's going to be some real key insights there. And we haven't actually got a name for this upcoming series yet, have we? That's exciting. I have to think about that. I know. Well, in life news, I'm about to experience my first school summer holidays. Now what? Now what is my question? Quite literally. Now what? What do I do?
It's fun. You'll enjoy it. It goes by so quickly.
I know. Really looking forward to it. Well, there we go. I think, is that season 7? We're doing mini-series at the moment. I think that's technically season 7 if you look at RSS. Wow.
Yeah.
Look at us.
Crazy. Yeah. Onward and upwards.
Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.
Bye.